IVM.
Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Uncle Please Say It Lockdown Edition. I'm Joel Pereira, and with me, as always, is my co-host and former drinking buddy, Tushar Abhichandani. Tushar, what's happening?
I'm very saddened by that former drinking buddy situation.
Yeah, for considering that we were drinking with each other socially, obviously, every week almost, and now I've forgotten what you look like. So
this is screw you, COVID.
Yes.
To us.
Also with us today, we have another special guest. This guy's a real gentleman and scholar, Dr. Abby Phillips. Welcome to the show, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Okay, so just a little bit of background. Dr. Phillips is a liver specialist and a clinical scientist and is with the liver unit at the Cochin Gastroenterology Group based out of the EMC Hospital in Kochi. We're so happy to have you on the show, Dr. Phillips.
No, my pleasure too.
Yeah. And as considering who our guest is today, we are obviously not going to be talking about the monsoons, I guess.
I'm actually just happy that we managed to get doctor here, considering the kind of hours that all doctors are putting in right now. Like it's really cool that you managed to take some time out to just come talk to us.
Yeah,
I mean, thank you so much.
We have even our work is now restricted. I specifically deal with liver disease patients, and it's most of the time I can actually deal with them offline. Online, and offline dealing is much lesser now. So we got a lot of time.
That's lucky for us.
Okay, so we are obviously in the middle of a pandemic. Everyone knows this, except I just had one of those situations. I'm sure there might be people in comas and all right now, right? Who have completely who don't have any idea that this is happening,
and they'll wake up.
And if they wake up, globally, right? So there must be like a fair number of people who are comatose right now, and probably might wake up a year from now, whatever, having missed this entire thing.
Yeah.
But what I mean is
silver lining of their coma, basically.
Silver lining of the coma. The sad part is that they'll get out of the coma and we all will look like identical to each other with long hair and long fingernails and ungroomed. Anyway, what we're talking about today is this. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but over the past 3 or 4 months, literally everything seems to be good for defeating corona. Literally everything that you put in your mouth. Like we've been having things that are quote unquote immuno boosters and bread that contains certain ingredients that are supposed to increase your resistance to disease and so on and so forth. And what we want to talk about today is how have we come to a point where we believe so much nonsense about medical science and what happens to our bodies. And this is all coming to the forefront now, but we've been like this for years and years and years.
The idea of so much alternative / holistic / special medicine that is the be all and end all of all kinds of cures, and just decides and it's stuff that apparently cures things that modern medicine has not been able to cure for a while. So we've hit that point.
I have this small theory. We're going to take a quick break, but before we go, I have to put this little theory out. So Tushar and me, Doc, are also we are also very interested in politics and current affairs and so on and so forth, and the impact of social media. And if you've noticed, we've come to a point right now where literally every opinion is valid if it has enough noise behind it.
Polarized India.
Yeah. So, and it's not just in India, it's globally, right? Everywhere. If there's enough noise behind an opinion, then that opinion suddenly seems to be valid. And is it possible that is affecting medicine as well? Okay, we're going to take a quick break right now, but when we come back, more with Dr. Phillips and, of course, Tushar and me.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another amazing week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. So it's been a really, really fun week this week. We've had a great episode with Anand Neelakanth on Cyrus Says. Anand was one of the writers of Bahubali, and he's done some really, really fun stuff since that. Ashish Vidyarthi also had a really good episode on his show, Begin the Journey. Please do check that out. You do know Yuddha is back, right? Definitely check it out if you haven't. Yuddha is our show about Indian ancient warfare. It's hosted by Anirudh Kanisetti and Aditya Ramanathan. Really, really great show. You should check that out for sure. And I forgot. Rishikesh was on the network as well. He was on Absolutely Right with Aditi Surana. Do definitely check that out. With that, let's get you back to the show.
And we're back from our break with us, Dr. Phillips and Joel and me, as always. And as we discussed before the break, we're going to be discussing this changing trend in medicine. Obviously, that's been sort of exacerbated by COVID. This trend of a lot of these pseudo-scientific and so-called alternative options towards medicine. And, Joel, you're going to tell us this story that you're going to tell us about before we went into the break.
So, before I relate my lovely and delightful anecdote. Quick question to Abby: does it upset you when people refer to these kind of things as with the word medicine in them?
To some extent, medicine is fine, but it's not scientific.
Yeah.
And you can have traditional medicine, you can have folklore medicine. Medicine is fine because it's something that you think might benefit you. That's the whole point. So it can be in any sense, but it's not science. So when Ayurvedic scientific medicine or homeopathic scientific medicine, that doesn't actually relate well.
No, what I meant was, considering someone with your qualifications, you have spent a lot of time, obviously, and a lot of hard work studying and, and doing a lot of things to master your art or your craft. And then there's someone else who says he is an expert in, say, I don't know, reflexology, who calls himself a doctor. And does that upset you?
No, it does not. It does not affect me personally because that is something that they would want to advertise from their side. Clinical medicine, there is no advertisements. We don't advertise as physicians. But alternative medicine, you need to advertise. And that is the whole point. So I don't feel bad about it. But as far as possible, I would try to correct or make them understand, not the person who's advertising himself, but somebody who wants to go for such a reflexology or a holistic kind of treatment. I would tell them the pros and cons of it and why it should be scientific and why is this very unscientific. Try to make them understand. There is no point fighting it.
Yeah.
There is no point fighting it.
And it's not, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's not just in India, right? It's a global phenomenon. I think over the past few years, we've seen this general skepticism towards medicine.
This is actually the silent pandemic, which nobody talks about.
And when I say skepticism, okay, let me just put it out what I mean exactly. It starts right from the start where you have forget the there's a general a little bit of fear of medicine, wherein it'll be okay, what about the side effects and what about the so on and so forth. Then all the way down to things like even established practices, and I'm talking about vaccines over here. Where you have, for instance, the polio vaccine, which has saved the lives of literally tens of millions of people. And you have people questioning this now, saying that, it causes this and it causes that. And why is this a big conspiracy? Why do you think that we've come to this point?
So I think the most important part is, and as clinicians and physicians, from a modern science point of view, we have lost communication.
Okay.
And that is the single most important point is that we have lost the skill of communicating with the patient and the patient family. You actually look at doctors, freshers who are out now. They just want to work. They take medicine as a 9-to-5 job. It is not medicine. Medicine is something that actually comes from within you. It's like a teaching. Doctor actually means a teacher. In the real Greek word, it means a teacher. So what you're doing is you're actually teaching the patient, telling him what you know and what your plan is and how he's going to get, positives and negatives of it. So the whole point is not giving a drug, but actually talking to the patient. And I think in what I do is, and what a lot of my seniors, what I've seen them do is, they sit in the OPD, they spend time with the patient, talking about the disease, talking about the natural history of the disease, talking about options for treatment. Like we just don't say that, if I treat a lot of patients with cirrhosis. So that's like permanent damage to the liver. It's a lifelong treatment, and all of them will end up with the liver transplant at some point. So I tell them very, very, very clearly, but not in a very rough manner, but I'll make them understand smoothly that this is how your disease is going to be in the next few years. And then we take it step by step. So at this moment, this is the issue. This is what we'll take care of. And we are not going to talk about transplants until that thing comes up. But if you actually look at other doctors, when they have so many patients to see in their OP, a cirrhosis patient comes to them, they say that, you have cirrhosis, your liver is fully gone, you'll need transplant sometime. So that patient actually loses faith in modern medicine. That is how they go to other sources, and they go to an Ayurvedic physician or a homeopathic physician who actually don't treat the disease, they actually treat symptoms, they treat the patient, they treat the mind, body, soul, sort of stuff, which makes the patient feel good. And they stick with that. Instead of actually going in for the real treatment, and then they come back to us in a very worse state. So I think the most important aspect is that throughout the few last years or decades, I think we have lost that skill of communicating with the patient. I think everybody should be doing, and actually we can prevent a lot of pseudoscientific practices just by that. It's a simple thing. Spend time for your patient. Simple. Yeah. This is one main important point.
So a lot of
one small thing I want to just jump in with.
Sure.
Do you also think it's also being caused by this glut of information that we have available to ourselves nowadays? In the sense, like, today you get a headache, you go to WebMD or something, and then it tells you 50 different things. And suddenly you decide that you have this problem, and then you basically are going to the doctor to affirm this problem. And when the doctor obviously tells you
that itself is the doctor's fault. Because if a doctor tells the patient exactly everything that he has to know about his disease, he will never go to the internet. And the issue with the internet is that, like, for example, if you take liver disease, you type in liver disease in the internet, it's like, it's hell out there.
Yeah.
You can only just see death and in liver disease, nothing else, transplant.
Get a running joke is no matter what you have, eventually you will have AIDS or cirrhosis or cancer.
Yeah, exactly. That is what the net tells you. But the whole point is that there is lots of stuff in between that, which people will miss. And then you will see a very simple website saying that cure for cirrhosis, take this stuff, come to me, contact this number. They'll do that. Why not?
Also, we're afraid, right? I mean, I'll tell you a brief incident, okay? Like last year, I have these friends who also live in Kerala only, by the way. They grow coffee in North Kerala. So they sent me some coffee from their own plantation, and they sent me instructions as to how to brew it, with the French press and this and that. So I am normally a tea drinker. I drank. But I was like, okay, this is homemade, homegrown coffee, this, that. So I made myself a cup. I followed their instructions to the tea, like the temperature of the water, brewing time, this, that, whatever. So I had 1 cup of coffee. Delicious. Okay, so after about 3-4 minutes, I'm like, if 1 was good, then 2 must be better. So I had 1 more cup of coffee. And I remember it was in the morning and I'm lying in bed and and suddenly, the AC is on, fan is on or whatever, and I'm starting to sweat, okay? I'm starting to sweat and I'm lying in bed and I'm holding my phone up and my hand is trembling, okay? And I'm sweating and I'm feeling weird, okay? And immediately, my first thought is, this is now I am dying. This is a heart attack, okay? Because I am overweight and I have been a smoker for a while. So I went online to check. I'm like, these are my symptoms: shortness of breath, palpitations, hand trembling, sweating, and the first thing that the heart attack. This is a heart attack. And then I scrolled down a little bit, and 7th or 8th on the list, was caffeine overdose. Okay, and I'm like, okay, this makes a little more sense. and then I clicked on caffeine overdose, and they said that happens when you have 2 or 3 cups of good coffee or whatever. Just wait for 15 minutes. If it doesn't go, then maybe think of other things. But yeah, like you were saying earlier, my first response, WebMD, heart attack. I'm dying. This is how I die. And I even thought, like, I remember I was not wearing a t-shirt. I was like, maybe I should wear something because if they need to find me, then I need to be clothed. But Doc, you were talking about alternate medicine and so on and so forth. I think one of the big myths. There are lots of myths, right? That are lots of things that people believe about alternative medicine, and one major one is, okay, it may not work, but at least it has no side effects. That is one big one. What do you, in your expert opinion, what do you think? What do you have to say to that?
So, alternative medicine, first, there are lots of alternative medicine. So, Ayurveda is one, Unani is one, Siddha is one.
Got it.
So, every alternative branch of medicine has equal or maybe even more side effects than, when compared to conventional medicine. That is modern medicine. So, just an example I can give you is that there is a patient, this was just a few months back, where, during this COVID time, a patient of mine, he's a stable liver disease patient, doing very well. Because there was this huge COVID cluster near his house, he went on and checked on the web, looking for immune boosters. So he found out these, if you actually check on the web and type in herbs for immune boosting, you will see methi in that, fenugreek, methi seeds. So what he did was, he actually took about 250 ml of methi seed boiled water in the morning and evening for about 1 week. Then this guy came to me about 2-3 weeks back later, saying that he's got small red spots on the skin. So I saw that, and it was like he was bleeding into the skin. Those were skin bleeds.
Okay.
So I could not figure it out because he's a stable cirrhosis guy. He has no chances of bleeding into the skin. Usually in advanced liver failure, you get bleeds like that. Then I checked his history, and then he told me for immune boosting, he was taking methi water, boiled water for about a week or 10 days. I went and checked the internet, and on the published literature, methi fenugreek actually contains something known as coumarin. Coumarin is basically a blood thinner. It's a natural blood thinner. And this guy was drinking lots of it. And when I checked his bleeding parameters on the blood test, they were sky high. I just gave him vitamin K, everything settled. So this is the whole point. Even simple fenugreek, if you actually take it in excess, you can actually bleed to death, especially in somebody with liver disease. So alternative medicine, safe, natural, is the biggest myth in the world. And we have actually proven it. My own study in 2016 actually proved the fact that you can have acute liver failure. Patients with good livers and patients with bad livers, both of them can develop liver failure if they consume unknown polyherbal formulations or follow traditional practices. We have well known, it's published. So without side effects, no one can say anything. Even drinking liters of water can actually cause a lot of harm to your body. You can get water intoxication. Whereas levels fall down and you can just collapse. So that way, I don't think alternative medicine is so safe. It is quite unsafe if you actually, if you don't know how to deal with it.
I think maybe the problem happens is because at least with allopathy, the side effects are documented, right? So you already have a list. Okay, like this.
Yeah. So
I think a lot of people see that and get scared. Oh, you can get this.
So this.
Okay, Tushar, 1 second. I just need to jump in over here. Because remember when we were doing our podcast about consuming meat, and I had to say stop calling it vegetarian and non-veg because like it's the standard. The standard is not vegetarian; it's the other way around. I did not know, for instance, that this word allopathy is not an actual word. It's just a word created by homeopathic doctors to differentiate themselves. Yeah,
exactly.
It's a fake word.
So same question to you, doctor, but with the word modern medicine.
So there's medicine and then there's everything else. Right. So it's like how, remember when we were doing the meat podcast, there was like, there's like normal consumption of food and then there's vegetarian and like whatever, vegan or whatever. Same way over here, there's medicine and then there's the other stuff. It's not. There's no such thing as allopathy.
Yeah,
And
it's evidence-based medicine and alternative medicine.
yeah, and don't get us wrong here, okay? Like for instance, there is, doctor, you would probably agree with me over here. There's a lot of, it's not like you're saying that all traditional medicine or all, like, this kind of stuff is bad, okay? Because I'm sure you know this. In 2015, a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine won the Nobel Prize for medicine, right? What was the drug that the malarial drug?
So that was actually artemisinin.
Hmm.
Artemisinin from Artemisia. That was a plant name. Now the best part of it is that the lady who her name is, who won the Nobel Prize is actually a trained pharmacologist in modern science.
Okay.
She chose to work in a traditional Chinese medicine university because she was very interested in finding out new compounds from herbs. And that curiosity actually led to discovery of artemisinin. So when we look at traditional practices of Ayurveda and homeopathy and all now, what they do is they just keep following the text that they have seen maybe 2,000, 3,000 years back. It has not evolved. So what we should be doing is that you should be training them in these new aspects of medicine where you have newer tools, newer research methodology, and then apply that. And then that is the way to actually improve on that science, the traditional science. So all the modern medicines that have actually herb related, I have actually put up a new post on Twitter on this, including your diabetes medicine, metformin, quinine for malaria, artemisinin for malaria. All of these were actually discovered by chemists and pharmacologists who are trained in modern medicine, not by herbalists.
Yeah, even, correct me if I'm wrong here, but even a drug as ubiquitous as aspirin was at one point traditional medicine, because there were cases, willow bark, right? They used to boil the bark and drink the tea as a painkiller.
Yeah,
and now it's aspirin, and that is the most, I mean, it's like the joke, right? Take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. It's like that. As ubiquitous a drug as aspirin, it's itself a derivative of traditional medicine.
Yeah.
But so why do you think we are not doing this, doctor? Why do you think we are not?
So I think at some point, I mean, the whole it's not a simple issue, right? Because what I feel is that one thing is that there's a huge communication gap between doctors and the patient. The big divide in this, the way people approach medicine, is because of one is corporate medicine mentality. The public thinks it's like looting, it's like a business. Second is we don't have a very good public health system to compete with that. And third is that in between all of these equation, it's like fishing in murky waters, and that's where the alternative medicine comes in. It's all messed up. So, I mean, the first step is to actually improve our public health system, and then slowly and steadily people will actually start believing in real scientific medical practices. Because if there is like in the US and Europe, I mean, I'm not saying this is the best, but I mean there should be a centralized system where people can actually believe in the real scientific medicine. In India, I mean, you can actually go anywhere, get any kind of treatment. That is not possible in the US. It's not possible in the Europe. So we should actually guide the population, the general population, towards the right direction. And that is actually the government's job. It is a job of a clinician. It is the job of a scientific person, like a scientist or a basic scientist. It's the job of the media. I mean, they all play a big part in it. But currently, if you look at it, everything is so messed up. There is no clear-cut guidelines on medical management in India. Look at how this pandemic is actually destroying people's thoughts. It's very sad.
No, but you spoke of India, but like for instance, even in first world countries, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with this idea of the detox.
Oh, you're very familiar.
as you read about in, say, these lifestyle magazines and stuff, right, where people are like, I was feeling whatever, so I decided to do a detox. So I stopped basically consuming solid food, and for 1 week I went on a juice cleanse. I believe that is one popular one.
Yeah, a lot of
And
stuff.
then there's another one wherein basically for an entire week, all you're consuming is lime juice and paprika. Paprika is like a chili powder with water, with warm water. And that's all you're consuming for like 5 days or something like that. And people believe this, right, as gospel, as truth.
Yeah, I mean, the word itself, right? Detox. That's what is catchy there, I mean, if a patient comes to me and says he's feeling unwell, I mean, it might be something to do with stress or whatever. He might not have a disease person, but he's unwell. So I tell him that it's okay, you're fine, just go home, just be cool. And then he comes and visits me again and again, saying that he still feels bad, all tests are normal. He says I want to do a CT, I do a CT scan, CT scan is fine. And ultimately I tell him that it's psychological, don't worry, I think it's in your head. So that actually offends him. Sometimes some patients actually get offended by that. You tell them that it's a psychological problem, you don't have a disease. So what they do is they go to a wellness center and they'll say, okay, you know what, we'll do this detox for you. And they'll make them drink juices and whatnot, tell them to not to take this, don't take that, drink papaya juice for 2 days. And I mean, absolutely no scientific evidence. I mean, there is no connection. 1 week you're drinking papaya juice, the other week you're drinking God. I mean, stuff like that. And ultimately they say, okay, 2 weeks are done, now you're detoxed. Do you feel good? He'll say, yes, I feel very well, because he's followed their protocol. Right. So that is the whole point of detox. It's, I think, one of the biggest hoaxes ever on planet Earth. A detox. Because already you have system in place for detox in your body. I mean, your liver and kidneys are the biggest detox organs you can have.
Yeah.
Especially in the lung.
Yeah.
They're all detoxing you every day, every second. And on top of that, another detox, I think that's purely business oriented. Nothing to do with science.
No, and the funniest thing with these, a lot of these places, where you go for 2 weeks and do all of this, people will come back like, I'm feeling so good. I'm like, so wait, what did you do? Then I woke up at 7, I had food at regular times, I slept for 8 hours, I exercised, and I stayed at a place with good air. I'm like, yeah, so obviously you will feel better.
That's the wellness center.
Yeah, that's the whole point. You stuck to a discipline and you ate normal food.
No, that's the whole point. I mean, it's the way we actually discuss this with people, with the patient population, right? And detox is a huge thing. I've had actually a patient coming in with, he was basically not, it was difficult for him to, go to the loo every day. I mean, like every 3 or 4 days, he used to have one bowel movement, and it was stressing for him. So he went to multiple doctors. They just gave him laxatives. It's not helping much and all. So he went and read somewhere on the net about this particular traditional medicine guy who is in Kerala, a big quack, by the way, and he's now been case filed by the police also, just a few months back.
Okay.
So he went to this guy and he actually gave him magnesium sulfate crystals. Magnesium sulfate crystals. And the moment he had that, continuously 2 to 3 days he was in the loo. He was just having diarrhea. And then he went back and said that, you are now detoxed. Everything that was in you is now out. Don't worry. This guy actually developed magnesium sulfate into his liver injury, which I reported in British Medical Journal.
Ouch.
Yeah. His liver functions were off the roof. Developed jaundice later on, and he was so dehydrated. It was quite bad. And this is the detox that we do here on another level. Other wellness centers are another level.
No, the funny thing with all of this is that, like for example, if you go to, I keep trying to say allopathy, but scientific medicine doctor, and if they and sometimes you go to a doctor, sometimes they don't treat you right, or they give you the wrong medicine. It happens sometimes, and then you'll be like, "Dekha, I went to this doctor and he did this." But whenever this happens with one of these holistic guys, like, this is complicated. Sometimes it doesn't work that much, but Actually,
there is a guy here who actually takes a on a paper, he takes this kind of a consent from the patient saying that whatever he does is not his fault. Yeah, so and he gives them all sorts of herbal stuff, and a lot of them have come to me. I've sent them a lot of patients for liver transplant also because of herbal medicine liver failure. But you cannot go back to that guy and litigate him because it's written on the paper. You have signed it saying that whatever happens to you, he's tried his best and it's not his fault. In Malayalam,
It's the reverse of a warranty.
I mean, we as clinicians can never do that. No, I cannot say that I'm going to give you this medicine. You try it. And now you put a signature.
If you die, it's on you now.
It's funny.
No, but I guess what you're saying here is like, so a few years ago, not few, like a long time ago, I think I was like 15 or so, I had jaundice. Okay, I had like hepatitis, and all the normal stuff, right? Your like pee is yellow and your whatever. So high fever, this, that. Went to a doctor. He's like, look, you have jaundice. It's a waterborne disease. It's quite common in the tropics. And don't worry. The jaundice is a symptom. And you just like consume a lot of fluids. Don't put stress on your liver by eating fatty foods. And relax and rest and, sleep a lot and whatever. And you'll be fine. Now, this, as it turns out later, is sound medical advice, right? For dealing with jaundice. But for my parents, this was not enough because the doctor has basically just told me to go home and relax. So they're like, no, something has to be done. Medicines have to be taken. So from some neighbor somewhere, they pull some like information from somewhere, and my dad takes me to some guy, okay, who is literally in the middle. Like I used to live outside of Bombay, so he's literally in the middle of the village somewhere, and he's some sort of herbologist or whatever. And he tells my father, okay, here is this bark of some tree. And every day your son has to chew on it for 5 minutes and spit it out and has to consume a lot of sugarcane juice. And do you know what snake gourd is?
Yeah.
Okay. Snake gourd. Snake gourd is magic for jaundice, and basically consume as much snake gourd as you can. And my mother took it to heart to a point now where thrice a day there was snake gourd in the house, where to date I was like, and this was before the internet and so on and so forth, but I was like, yeah, the doctor, what he said makes sense, that I need to flush this thing out of my system, consume a lot of fluids and just give my liver a rest. And to date now, I cannot look at the sight of snake gourd without feeling like a retch coming up in my throat. Because and I know what you mean, because the doctor's like, yeah, just relax, you'll be fine. But that was not enough. We need more. We need more.
When we say jaundice, it can be a simple thing as, a physiological jaundice. Like when you're born, you have jaundice. And that's why they do phototherapy and things like that, and, take care of in infants. Jaundice, very benign condition, nothing to worry. To liver cancers that can cause jaundice. So jaundice is actually a very broad thing. And a lot of stuff can come in between. So these herbalists, they're very intelligent people, alternative practitioners, very intelligent. So they will not treat some jaundice that they feel will not go away. Like for example, if somebody has liver cancer and that cancer has led to liver failure and jaundice, that won't go away. That is going to be there for life, and he's going to die with liver failure. Like what happened to you when you were 15 years of age, who probably could be hepatitis A or hepatitis E, acute viral hepatitis, which actually will take its sweet time and go, whether you treat or don't treat. So the only thing we have to do is that have good food. Relax, like exactly the doctor said. And so slowly and steadily, within a few weeks, your jaundice is going to come down.
Yeah. Correct.
Now, what the other guy will say is that, last 2 days back, I had a patient, young guy, who had jaundice, and I gave him this bark. And now he's jaundice free after 1 week. So that is how they advertise. So with and without that bark, your jaundice will go away. But you will not treat a jaundice that will not go away. And they know which jaundice will actually go away and which will not. That is the whole point. But the patient population, they'll say that I've had patients with advanced liver failure going to herbalists and then coming back and saying that, this guy said in 2 weeks' time, my jaundice will go away, but it is still not going away. So I have to come back to you. So then I understood that even the herbalist does not realize what jaundice this is. Some of them actually do realize it is viral hepatitis, it will go away. Some of them don't realize what they're dealing with. And they keep treating and make it a mess.
which actually is a
COVID also, right? Because a lot of times people are saying, I took this and that when I had COVID. But you don't know if the COVID went away because of that or it just went away.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, these are what we call anecdotal experiences.
Yeah.
It has no science behind it.
Yeah.
It's an experience. Like some people experience UFOs and out of the body experience and stuff like that. I mean, that's what is happening in this
Pretty
pandemic.
much.
like in preparation for this today's podcast, right? I went online and I was just looking for just stuff about medicine that we think is right and we get wrong. And this is just, it has nothing to do with this conversation, but I think I just need to put it out there for our listeners. Things that you think you know, which are nonsense. Like, for instance, there is no actual medical evidence to say that you get that colds increase if you actually are feeling cold. Like, for instance, if you have if you get wet in the rain, or if you are walking around on a winter's day, there's no actual evidence that you will automatically fall sick because of it.
There's no evidence.
Yeah. Or for instance, there is absolutely no evidence that, relating to cold itself, that sitting around with wet hair or not covering your head, there's this thing that if you cover your head, you won't get cold because the body heat goes out from the head, apparently. So you should cover your head. And apparently that's also nonsense. How is it, Doctor, do you think that these beliefs persist?
No,
And so some beliefs persist. Over time, we've had a lot of beliefs about a lot of things. Some of them die off. But why is it that these beliefs persist for so long?
yeah, because it's. I think it's because it's something to do with health. Health is something that is very close to. I mean, it is very important when it comes to the matter. The depth of matter. When somebody falls sick, so that's like a real deal for people, right? I mean, if you lose some money here and there, they'll say, okay, maybe we'll get it back. Don't worry. But health is different. The people approach it very differently. So that is why when you have a disease, I mean, it can be a bad disease and it could be a benign disease also. But when you have a disease, people actually look around for all sorts of options and try to cherry pick the best, safest one. And unfortunately, modern medicine has this bad boy painted all over it, which is why people go back to this traditional way of saying, eat hot foods this time, don't take cold foods that time, bring some, like you said, nimbu pani with paprika. I mean, stuff like that, which absolutely makes no sense. Because the whole point is modern medicine has been pictured in such a vile manner by a lot of, stakeholders in other areas, lobbies, like you said, anti-vaxxers. They all either they're ignorant about the whole fact or they themselves are, fear mongers. There are people like that. But I think modern medicine, if you actually deal with it compassionately, modern medicine should deal with health and the patient and the disease compassionately. That actually makes a huge difference. I mean, you can actually ward off a lot of these alternative, all this pseudo-scientific stuff that is happening in the world right now. That is most important.
How much of a reason of this is the placebo effect? In the sense, how much of what is happening with regards to the popularity of all these things is also...
I think the best example of placebo effect is homeopathy. I think that is, it's all done and tested. I mean, if you look at the NHS in the UK, I mean, they have stopped funding for homeopathy. Previously, they used to have, insurance and medical insurance for homeopathy, but right now they have completely taken it off. You have to pay from your pocket if you want to go for homeopathy. And a lot of homeopathy hospitals have been shut down in the UK because there have been a lot of studies actually done. I mean, unlike Ayurveda, Ayurvedic science is actually something that has been passed on. And people actually believe it. It's like inbuilt. It's in the blood. So you don't have to do any studies on it. But homeopathy actually has gone through a lot of randomized controlled trials and such, even bigger meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is actually the highest level of scientific study that one can do on multiple quality studies. So even that has shown that homeopathy, to a large extent, I mean, I'm talking about almost 100%, has no effect on a lot of disease conditions that they actually prescribe it for. So that is the placebo effect. the placebo effect actually is a real thing and actually plays a big role. And that actually has to do with mostly benign diseases, not the real diseases that we actually have to take care of through either proper medication or a proper intervention. So placebo effect is there. And what I feel is in this COVID, I mean, hydroxychloroquine is the number one example of placebo effect currently running in the world. I mean, you see the craze that was on hydroxychloroquine. But now you see the beautiful studies that have come out. Initial studies were all cooked up. A lot of issues with that, some were even retracted. But now the studies that have come out are from real clinical groups, and they have actually shown that hydroxychloroquine does nothing in COVID. It's a bystander phenomenon. You give it or not, COVID will move as it has to move. But there are certain things that we can do for COVID patients who are very sick, who are moderately sick. And one of that is one of the cheapest drugs, which is dexamethasone. This has been proven in the recovery trial also. It's wonderful.
So apparently in 2014, there was a study done by a medical center that's attached to affiliated to Harvard University, the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where they actually did a study to see how people reacted to migraine pain medication. Okay, so one group of people took a migraine drug that had the drug's name on it. Okay, and another group took a placebo that was actually called placebo. Okay. Like the people who are taking, normally, I believe in drug testing, when they give the control group, they give the placebo to the control group. They don't tell them that is the placebo.
Yeah, they look similar.
Yeah, they look similar, but they don't tell them that this is the actual drug and this is the placebo. But in this study, they actually told the people that this is a placebo, this is a sugar pill. Okay, and a third group took nothing, right? And the researchers found out that the placebo, even though the guy taking the placebo knew it was a placebo, was still 50% as effective as the real drug to reduce the pain after a migraine attack. And I guess that ties into a lot of what you were saying about medication, right? That the ritual, I guess, of doing something about it.
Yeah, that is why with medications you'll never say 100% you'll be fine. That is that margin that we have to leave, because everybody responds differently. For example, I think if you look at modern medicine, the poster boy of modern medicine brutality is paracetamol. Crocin. I mean, everybody says you put in a small talk on Twitter or Facebook saying that this Ayurvedic medicine is dangerous. The next comment will be paracetamol. Paracetamol is also dangerous. But actually, people don't understand that paracetamol is toxic if you want to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So all the toxicity studies on paracetamol published in literature whereby people who took it killed themselves. It's not because they took one or two tablets of paracetamol, they actually had a problem in the liver. And these people don't understand that. But because when you look into internet, type in paracetamol liver, you'll see a lot of acute liver failure. All those are suicidal attempts. Either suicidal or unintentional intake of high paracetamol. Now, this is the whole issue. I mean, if you have a drug, you cannot say that, this drug is going to, I mean, you might have I have experienced it. I had a headache. I have taken 2 paracetamols. My headache still remains. I go lie down for a while. And I'm okay. The paracetamol is supposed to work within 30 to 40 minutes, but it did not. I mean, that is that placebo margin that we have to leave behind. Every drug cannot guarantee. And this is what even physicians and the patient should also know. That this margin has to be there, and it's a fair margin. Because we are trying our best. This is what science has found out, and this is the best that we can offer you now. Now, in the future, there might be a new drug which will actually give you 100% headache relief. But right now, this is what we have. So if you actually tell them that, then people will understand the placebo effect. And something like 100% placebo effect, like in homeopathy, and going for that, now that is really nonsense. That's real pseudoscience.
But one thing that I wanted to ask you, I wanted to discuss with you, is like, we as lay people, right? We are not, we will believe what we are told, right? And it depends on the source, like who's telling us, right? So have we come to a point where, for instance, something like, say, modern medicine, is it too complex for us to understand? like, the processes that are happening, the drugs that are being used, or the surgical techniques and so on and so forth? Is it too complex for a person to understand, or is it just lack of communication?
It is lack of communication. Very simple.
Hmm.
Because medicine, actually, I mean, it's not rocket science.
Hmm.
I think if you look at all the scientific,
I think that should be the quote of the podcast. Medicine is not rocket science.
Yeah.
Doc, if medicine isn't rocket science, then what is rocket science?
clinical medicine is actually not at all tough. I mean, it is the way that you present yourself, right? See, I can actually have this conversation, this podcast, in complete medical jargon, and leave everybody just flabbergasted. You will be like, what is this guy? I mean, we didn't understand anything, and now next podcast will be with a homeopathic Ayurvedic practitioner who will tell you things very simple, and you'll go for that. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that medicine is definitely becoming more and more complex. The way medicine is actually evolving, it is very complex. But to actually discuss that with a patient from a treatment point of view, it's so simple. It's just it's just basic knowledge about how to approach the patient. That is all that is required. That is what I meant by what I meant by it's not rocket science. For example, like I told you regarding hepatitis A, viral hepatitis. Just make the patient understand that this is a benign condition. Even if you take a medicine or not, it will go away only in 2 weeks. Now, in a very small percent of patients, viral hepatitis can lead to acute liver failure. That is below 1%. It's very rare. In that instance, the patient actually has to undergo liver transplant also. But you don't tell them that, because you can identify if the patient is actually going to go into that particular situation or not as a physician. So you don't have to tell them that, there might be acute liver failure going to happen to you and you might get a transplant at some point, but currently you go home and relax. So that is not the way. You tell them that, this is okay, this is fine, and you take it in the sense there is nothing more to do. Get that confidence, give them that confidence that medicine itself is, you're not, doctors are not on a pedestal. I mean, if you ask me, a new patient comes to me, a challenging case, I am at the same level as that patient. I don't know anything more than him, than what he's telling me. Then we actually sit together, I take a history, I understand the whole situation, then it comes to me. Then that is where the clinical medicine part comes. I understand this is the issue. I tell him these are the issues and this is my plan and this is how we will go. And then we will see. So this plan might work out with medicines only. It might lead to a surgery or it might lead to some small intervention at some point. So they should know about all of this. At that point, you will understand, the patient himself will actually or herself will know that, they are at that, they are at that safe zone where, if something goes bad, this guy can actually tell me beforehand.
So Doctor, why do you think this communication issue exists? Is it because we don't have enough doctors? Is it because there's a lot of commercialization? Is it also being driven partially by the influence of pharmas and corporates? Like, why does a lot of this happen?
I would actually check all those boxes that you said. Everything. I mean, pharma definitely. There are a lot of stuff that is pharma driven, and I'll say it openly. I have no issues with it. Because it's a truth. A lot of stuff is actually driven by the pharma. For example, I'm just going to give you a small example of a molecule. I'm not going to give you the names of it. The molecule's name is ursodeoxycholic acid, UDCA. Like if you just type in UDCA, you can see all the brands available in India of that particular molecule. Now, if you actually look at it, UDCA, when my dad is a very senior gastroenterologist. So he's been in the practice for almost 40 years. So from the time he was practicing, only this molecule was available as like a liver protective agent. That is how they actually marketed the molecule at that time. Now, fast forward for decades, the people still use that molecule because it's been etched into the minds of all the physicians that this molecule was the first molecule which was actually used for liver protection at that time. So it's still valid now. But actually, if you look at the literature, that particular molecule UDCA is it's good only for 3 conditions in current medical literature. But if somebody has a jaundice, whatever the causes, this particular drug is written by every physician, every gastroenterologist, everywhere. And it's purely driven by pharma because when the guy comes to the doctor and shows this molecule on his laptop or tablet, whatever, It's written there, hepatoprotective, liver protective, used for so many years. So the doctor writes it. But they don't follow the science. This is one part where actually pharma plays a role in pushing molecules, which actually it's not supposed to be. Second is the corporate outlook. That actually, a doctor's duty is to treat the patient. You should not look at it as business. But sadly, that is what has happened now. And that is mostly because I think of privatization. Lots of hospitals competing with each other. And that has actually led to this corporate kind of working for these doctors. So what they do is they have to see a lot of patients. So a doctor who sees a lot of patients is the best doctor. A doctor who sees few patients, not so good. That is a mentality now. So patients go to the doctor who sees like 100 patients in a day. That guy spends 10 seconds with that patient and he feels completely, disappointed. So I went to this doctor and he just spoke to me for 10 seconds. So that whole divide is happening because of that. So that definitely the corporate part is there, the pharma part is there. And on top of that, the whole point of other pseudo-scientific practices taking an upper hand.
That's a very interesting point that you made about the because a cousin of mine is also a doctor. She is an ENT surgeon, and she was telling me once about how you go to her point was that medicine has progressed to such a point. She's like as someone who does diagnosis. She's like, I can identify a ailment. She's like 96% of the time you can identify an ailment within seconds. Okay, as a trained clinician, as a trained physician, and she's like, I will sit there, I will see all the symptoms, I will see, okay, this is what it is. Within seconds, I have understood that this is the problem, this is the solution, either medication or like whatever, or tests or surgery or whatever, and in a minute I'm done, right? She's like, and then she asked me if I've ever gone to a homeopathic doctor or an Ayurvedic doctor. I haven't personally, but she's like, if you ever go to one, that person is going to sit down with you. That person is going to talk to you. That person is probably has a book in which he's making notes about you. Like, what did you do then? What did you do a year ago? What have you been eating? Are you stressing about things? And so on and so forth. So she was saying that basically going to a practitioner or alternate medicine is like going for therapy, wherein you've spent 45 minutes with this person and you come out immediately feeling better because basically someone has sat down and listened to your problem, right? Where you have a problem and someone has just listened to you, heard you out and saying, okay, you know what? You are sick and good. It's like she was telling me, it's like basically how your mom, when you say, oh mom, I'm not well, and your mom is like, oh poor baby, I'll make you like soup and I'll give you hot soup and you sit in bed and you eat this soup and you will feel better and immediately you're like, oh, I feel so loved and I'm on my way. And she's like, that is what we don't do in modern medicine anymore.
That is what I think modern medicine practitioners should take away from alternative medicine. Forget about what all the other stuff they're doing, but just take this part from them. Like, spend time with the patient. There is this famous Hippocrates. I mean, you might know this statement which says,
"Do no harm.
Treat, cure sometimes, treat often, but comfort always."
Okay.
So that is what medicine is. This is by Hippocrates. And that actually is for real clinical medicine. But that comfort always is now forgotten. Now it's treat often, treat all the time, and cure sometimes. But you have to treat. You have to give this medicine, that medicine. You actually exhaust the patient financially and mentally. And that is what modern medicine is doing now. And it's a very sad situation. But I'm not sure how it is going to improve. Even though when we have the knowledge about it. But I'm not sure how it is going to improve. But this training has to be there at every level of clinical medicine education. From MBBS to MD to DM. I mean, I was fortunate to work in some of the best hospitals in the country for my studies. And my professors, I call them dinosaurs. Like you don't get to see them now. People like that. They'll never let you do one unnecessary test, even a single blood test. they say don't prick that patient for a blood sample unless you really want. It pains. So if you really want to do it, do it. Otherwise, clinically, you tell me what it is, and for confirmation, you do that. So, I have learned under such professors, and where they've actually, trained me and my colleagues who are my batchmates and all. We've been trained to actually sit with the patient more, discuss more of clinical stuff, discuss the plan. Then you talk about treatments and stuff like that. Just like what you said about, the therapy part.
Yeah.
It's very important. But I think that is completely lost now. People just want to know where patient comes. It's like one patient comes, the second patient comes, the third patient comes. More patient you see, more business you are making for the hospital. The more tests you do, the better the doctor you are for the hospital. But that is the thought. I think that should come down at some point. And then people will start getting better health care in our country, I think.
Well, Doctor, I need to ask you one thing which seems to be going on a lot these days. And based on your clinical experience, your academic experience, how does one boost immunity?
Can it even be done? Is it possible?
So, immunity boosting is actually a pseudo-scientific term.
Okay.
Number one. That's used by these wellness experts and, people who are not clinical doctors. So, if you actually look at that simple, immunity, it's one of the most complicated things in the human body. You have adaptive immunity. You have innate immunity. Like you have an immunity within you, which is there, which is given by God at birth, which matures over time. And then there is an immunity that you actually experience, improve experience. Like you get a cold or a viral infection. Then next time that viral attack comes, you don't feel anything because you already developed the antibodies to that particular virus. So that is adaptive. And on top of that, every organ system has its own immune environment. Like the liver has a separate immune environment. The spleen, another organ, has a separate immune environment. Even your lungs have a separate immune environment. So what are we boosting here? That is my question. When you say immune boosting, which organ, which environment, which type of immunity are you boosting?
Yeah.
So the whole term itself is complete hoax. When anybody says this is for immune boosting, that guy needs to be in jail. It's criminal.
So basically just stay healthy as much as you can.
Yeah, just follow your routine stuff. Good sleep, good food, avoid stress. We all say it, but we cannot avoid everything. I miss meals. Yeah. I sleep very less.
Yeah.
You can just say it, but that is why all these terms come up, because of our lifestyle changes, immune boosting and stuff like that. But there is nothing called that. Immune boosting is actually a big myth. You cannot boost it with anything. I told you about the guy who tried his immune boosting with methi. And look where it landed.
Not be doing stuff like that.
Yeah, but there are these. A few days ago, if you follow Dr. Phillips on Twitter, he did this thread about aloe vera juice. Yeah. And it took me by surprise also because so according to the thread, if basically aloe vera is if consumed in certain quantities is bad for you and you shouldn't be doing it, and at best you should be rubbing it on your skin, not necessarily juicing it and consuming. Yeah. And I didn't know that, because I was like, again, it seems like everyone's doing it. I walked down to the store and in the half, like if you go to the, the stores have the fridge, right, where they keep all the beverages. And half of them is like Coke and Pepsi and Fruity and whatever else. And the other half is just all these drinks, which with like aloe vera and mango and aloe vera and pineapple and aloe vera and this and aloe vera and that. And it's supposed to be good for people who have diabetes. And it's like this magic thing. And apparently it's really bad for you, right?
Aloe vera, definitely there are the only actual published studies on effects of aloe vera is for wound healing. For patients with chronic or long-standing wounds, there is some benefit in that for wound healing. But aloe vera as an oral agent, something that you take inside, actually has a lot of issues. There are no proven studies that shows that aloe vera is actually beneficial for any disease, for diabetes even for that matter. But there might be some plant chemical in aloe vera that can bring down the sugar levels. But the whole point is to identify that particular molecule and then use that so that you actually know how things work out and not take the whole plant. So that is what is evidence-based modern medicine versus traditional medicine. So aloe vera, if you take the whole plant, the leaf part, that's a thick covering, which is actually quite, it has a lot of saponins and anthraquinones. Those are the chemicals in those part. They are actually liver toxic. And I've had at least 3 or 4 patients coming to the OP with very bad liver tests and jaundice because they have been consuming aloe vera gel drinks as part of a detox program. And the moment we stop aloe vera, the liver injury actually calms down, the liver functions improve. So aloe vera is one. And there is one major plant that a lot of these Ayurvedic practitioners and even general population use for diabetes, and that is, in Hindi you call it as gurmar, sugar destroyer.
Okay.
You can just buy it off Amazon. Just go to 1mg Amazon, you can just buy it off. It's so easy to get, but it is one of the most liver toxic agent ever. That plant name is Gymnema, and in Hindi it is known as gurmar.
Okay.
And people diabetes patients, when the doctor tells them that, you have to take insulin, when it's a big deal for them. You have to poke yourself. Insulin means death. Insulin means kidney failure, dialysis, everything is gone when they say insulin. But actually, insulin is one of the best treatments for some group of diabetes patients. But the way the doctors say it, some of them, they become quite hassled by it and they try for all this stuff. So I've had a lot of patients who actually stop insulin, their sugars go sky high. Then they go and consume these gurmar and all from the internet and come with severe jaundice. And it's not simple jaundice. There is a type of jaundice called cholestatic jaundice, where you actually keep on itching. You cannot sleep. You have yellow eyes, you're peeing yellow. On top of that, you're itching yourself. That is known as cholestatic jaundice. And it's very commonly seen with this particular herb, which I don't think anybody actually realizes. Not many people know about it, but they actually consume it. And they've had a lot of cases with this.
I think the easiest way to debunk someone who says, but it's herbal, it must be zero side effects or whatever. It's like, yeah, but so is like ricin. Ricin is also herbal. So,
there's Ayurvedic product with ricin in it.
Wow, really?
Yes. There is a tablet called Dhanvantram Guliga.
Okay.
It's an Ayurvedic tablet made from the classical text. You won't believe it. You can actually buy the tablet and look behind the contents. And it is written there. Baby elephant excreta.
Okay.
Is one of the contents. And the second content is semen from the civet cat. It's an endangered species. I have no idea where they find that. Forget that semen part. I don't know. You cannot find the civet cat. It's an endangered species. But these are actually ingredients as per Ayurvedic text in that particular tablet, and it's still marketed. And I'm sure none of that stuff is there in that. Because how are you going to get all this stuff? It's there. You can just type in Dhanvantram Guliga and see the contents.
My God.
This is what people take for immune boosting and stuff like that. It's rampant here. I've actually put this as one of my Twitter posts, and actually I have published on this because somebody who has taken this particular tablet has developed liver injury. So I've actually published reports on it also. And that was the first time I actually saw it. So that is like your non-vegetarian Ayurveda. You don't actually expect this stuff to be in Ayurveda. It's purely herbs, But this was the first time I actually saw a non-vegetarian Ayurvedic tablet.
And there's also plenty of, there used to be a lot of heavy metals also, right? I believe like lead and mercury and etc.
I think, that's actually, one is adulteration. The way they make it is not correct. Good manufacturing practices are very poor for some Ayurvedic drugs. Second is that they actually put it in that. It's part of something known as Ayurvedic metallurgy, where they have herbs with minerals. So that is herbo-mineral preparations, where they have heavy metals along with herbs, which I think is like a killing combination. Because I have had patients who have, commonest ones which we deal with. I have a lab which is actually approved by the Ministry of Forest and Environment, where I send my patient samples to analyze. So it's a neutral lab. The maximum, there's a post that I have put recently about a 16-year-old girl who took these Ayurvedic medications for seizures. She was having childhood seizures, and then they were not very convinced about modern medicine, saying that, you should take it up till 20, 22 years of age, and only then you can stop modern medicine for seizures. She was not very convinced, and then they went for Ayurveda. And this Ayurvedic doctor gave a lot of medicines. One of that particular medicine contained about 2000 milligram per kilogram of arsenic.
Wow.
That is almost 2 gram per kilogram. Small tablets, and she's been taking that for 5 years. And it's very well documented that arsenic can actually cause cirrhosis. It can actually lead to permanent changes and damage in the liver. Whereby your liver pressure increases and you can have bleeding. You can have vomiting of blood and stuff like that. This girl at 16 years of age, she came to us with vomiting of blood. And then we looked back and saw that she was taking this stuff for 5 years, analyzed it, found out very high levels of arsenic, and the diagnosis was chronic arsenic poisoning because of this particular drug. So heavy metals is rampant even now. A lot of preparations contain it. Arsenic, cadmium, 2 very liver toxic agents. Apart from this, you have a lot of patients coming with kidney diseases. For them, they have a lot of mercury, lead. Even that can cause a lot of kidney issues. There are a lot of cases where patients have kidney disease and it remains undiagnosed. Like you can say that, you have diabetes, and then you have diabetes, kidney disease because of long-standing diabetes. But there are a lot of group of patients where you don't know the reason why they have developed that particular kidney disease. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of this alternative medicine. If you actually take a very close history, clinical history, dating long back, you can actually figure out that, some event like this would have probably happened to them, which has led to this disease now. So Ayurvedic medicines, not only that herb toxicity, you have to deal with the heavy metal toxicity also at some point. Yeah.
Damn, this is.
Yeah, I'm stunned now. I think
but it's a lot to and now like we keep saying on this show, right? This it serves only as a primer.
Yeah.
This is where we begin. Like someone needs to tell you that don't just take things blindly. Don't just listen to people. Question these things. And I guess that is the theme of the show. Question these things, because uncles have a lot of nonsense opinions. And a lot of people say a lot of crap.
Let's do a lot of people our age also.
Yeah. So we've made it very clear now. Uncles is not necessarily like just older, like
a lot of young generation. Youngsters. Even they believe in such stuff now.
Yeah.
It's like
yeah. So this is just a starting point, guys. Just open up the internet. We have Google, the same Google that a doctor has. You have as well, and check all these things out.
Yeah, you are educated and literate enough to actually understand. Like, for example, if a lot of my patients ask me when I give them a drug. I'm a liver specialist and I give them a drug, and they ask me is it liver safe. Okay, I tell them it's liver safe, it's fine. But you go to an Ayurvedic guy, he gives 5 drugs containing 28 herbs. You never ask him if it's safe.
But I think we circle back to the first question we spoke about, right? People have this weird belief that Ayurvedic drugs have no side effects.
Exactly. Any alternative practitioner must be questioned about the particular drug he is giving. Ask them the benefit, ask them for scientific evidence, ask them to show the clinical efficacy and safety.
That's what I think. All of this, I think all of this, it's just, if you want to have these systems, then bring them all under like scientific testing and, all these trials. And
but they don't do it because a lot of stakeholders get burned if you do that.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, but this is a good point for us to wrap this podcast, this episode that we've done today.
Rare instances, because we've gotten so many facts, we're a little speechless, especially the last part.
Yeah, especially the last part, no?
Oh, shit. And I think also both of us are just thinking back to who in our families takes these things. And we need to have a conversation with them.
No, my mom used to take one of these multivitamins, daily use multivitamins that she didn't need. But she was like, my friend is taking them, and she seems to be like enjoying the experience, so I should take them too. And I got her to stop because I'm like, again, with the most benign. I remember reading about this particular, one of those OTC multivitamin kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, so I did a little bit of research, and it's like at best your pee is very expensive. At worst, you're doing yourself damage. I'm like, why do you want to do this, man? And then she stopped.
I mean, just because you said multivitamin, I think I'll just give you one small anecdote. I mean, real life experience.
Yeah.
There is a vitamin called vitamin B3.
Right.
Niacinamide.
Niacin, yeah.
So if you actually look at all these energy drinks,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not naming them, but a lot of energy drinks, they actually have supraphysiological doses, very high doses of niacinamide. Along with that, they have other amino acids called taurine and all that, which actually gives you that dump, I mean, you feel like somebody has kick-started you.
Yeah.
So this niacinamide is a vitamin actually. But if you actually take niacinamide in very high doses, it can actually cause liver failure. So this happened to me, to one of my patients a couple of weeks back, where he had a change in jobs, where he had to do more of night shifts. So he wanted to keep himself awake, and he used to consume 1 or 2 energy drinks per week, but then he suddenly increased it to about 6 to 8 in 48 hours.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And he came down with severe jaundice, with fluid in his abdomen. I thought he developed cirrhosis, one shot. I mean, you don't get cirrhosis in one shot. I mean, you get cirrhosis after many, many years.
Yeah.
So this guy came, we did his liver biopsy, and that liver biopsy showed severe liver cell damage. And then we put him on conservative care. Over the course of a week, he actually deteriorated. So we did a repeat liver biopsy. And that actually showed permanent damage to the liver within a week.
Wow.
And this is just because he consumed excess of energy drinks. So energy drink is actually one of the causes for acute hepatitis. Overconsumption. Because it contains this simple vitamin B3 in high levels. So if you are going to go for an energy drink, I always say look behind what is written. See the doses of vitamins and supplements, whatever they have used. Some energy drinks actually use green tea extracts, which is very liver toxic. And if such stuff are there, don't take it. Like you said, your friend's coffee from North Kerala, I think is a good.
Caffeine overdose.
Moderation.
These are real life instances where a simple energy drink can also cause. That patient died, by the way, last week.
Oh wow!
He got a liver transplant, but he could not make it.
Oh my God!
Yeah, once in a while it's okay, it's fine, but not like this. Everything has its own limits. Everything has. If I take 6 energy drinks, I might be okay, but somebody might actually develop liver failure.
Yeah.
Who does develop such problems? We still don't know yet, but in future we can actually identify such patients. Science is evolving. We can actually identify which patient will develop which type of side effect, which type of drug. We can do that. So that is personalized medicine, and it is coming up in the future.
That'd be an interesting case.
Okay, on this optimistic note, I think it's time we needed something to say, okay, see doc, just as that Ayurvedic or that guy's like, don't worry, buddy, it'll be fine. This was your version of don't worry, buddy, it'll be fine. Because otherwise, sleepless night, we're all going to die. Okay.
Yeah, so thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. I think that was very enlightening for all of us. And I'm really hoping that a lot of people listen to this and then just sort of start thinking more about what they're doing when it comes to medicine. If you like the podcast, don't forget to check out our other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. Doctor, your handles on Twitter and Instagram?
It's Dr. Abhi Phillips.
On both?
On Twitter, yeah.
On Twitter, okay. I am Tushar_Abhi on Instagram, and Yon OK Please on Twitter. Joel, you are?
I'm Pereira Joel on Twitter and joelpereira.esq on Instagram.
That's it from us, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. See you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Doc. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
How many times have you motivated yourself to improve your sleep or lose weight or be more productive? How many times have you failed? Hi, my name is Ashton Doctor. Tune into my show, The Habit Coach Podcast, where we focus on creating small, tiny habits to improve your life instead of those big, impossible tasks. So make listening to me a habit every Monday, Wednesday and Friday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or on your favorite podcasting app.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.